Parasitism. A parasite is the organism living on or in the body of another organism and deriving its food more or less permanently from its tissues. Those organisms which derive their nourishment only partly and remain in contact with their host for a short period of their life cycles, however, are not true parasites. The typical parasite lives in its host without killing it, whereas the predator kills its prey upon which it feeds. Yet, there are parasites which kill their host and are predators which eat only a part of their prey. Some of the scientists consider the parasitic vascular plant under partial parasites. A wide variety of plants and animals are parasites in their mode of existence. There are some parasitic vascular plants like Cuscuta, that is a total stem parasite, grow on other plants on which they depend for nourishment. Young stem twines around the host stem from which adventitious root develop that finally penetrate the stem of host, establishing the relationship with its conducting elements. The specialized roots are called hostoria. Other such example includes Orobench, Conopholis and Epiphagus, which are found on the roots of higher plants. Rafflesia is found on roots of Vitis. Members of the family Loranthaceae are partial stem parasites. They grow rooted in branches of host trees. Others like Centellum album and Thesium are partial root parasites. Their roots are attached to host plants. Animals parasitic on animals belong to protozoa, various invertebrates and a few vertebrates, whereas animals parasiting plants are some gall wasp and gnats, the eggs of which are laid on stem and leaves of plants. Parasitism may occur even within the species. For example, in deep sea anglefish, Photocoreus spinceps, the male lives as a permanent parasite upon the head or side of the female, obtaining nourishment for blood supply. Parasitism may occur even within the species. For example, in deep sea anglerfish, Photocoreus spinceps, the male lives as a permanent parasite upon the head or side of the female, obtaining nourishment for blood supply. This type of relationship is common in higher plants where the growing pollen tube may be conceived of a male plant parasitic on the tissues of stigma and style of the flower. The detailed account of parasitism is beyond the scope of present text. To this relationship may also be added the hyperparasites, which are chiefly fungi growing parasitically on other parasites. For example, a pycnidial fungus Cycnoboletus is found as hyperparasite on a number of powdery mildew fungus. Now, let us have a look at types of host-parasite relationship. Parasites are completely dependent on host and their host-parasite interaction is very dynamic. Depending on the recognition of parasite on host, it is classified as follows. Let us have a look at the classification based on their interactions with their host as well as their life cycles. First, ActoParasites. ActoParasites are the organism which inhabit on the skin or outgrowth of the skin of their host for various periods and may be detrimental to the later. Various ActoParasites cause significant infestations in many kind of domestic animals including livestock, pets, laboratory animals, poultry, fish and bees. Many of these ActoParasites, for example, most lice are host specific, while others, for example, many ticks parasitize a wide range of hosts. several ectoparasites currently associated with domestic animals have been acquired by the introduction of either host or parasite into new regions as animals have become domesticated throughout the world. For example, cattle, goats and other important domestic livestock species have been introduced into much of Africa, where they may now fall victim to the ravages of native tsetse flies belonging to the species Glossina and ticks, as well as pathogens transmitted by these parasites. Relatively rapid intercontinental transportation of these animals have compounded the problem. The vast majority of ectoparasites are invertebrates. Most invertebrate ectoparasites are arthropods. Insects and arachnids typically parasitize terrestrial domestic animals, while crustaceans are associated with fish. Second, endoparasites. A parasite that inhabits the internal organs or tissues of an animal or plant is called endoparasites. Endoparasites can exist in one of two forms: intercellular parasites that inhabit the spaces in the host body, or intracellular parasites that inhabits cells in the host body. These intracellular parasites like protozoa, bacteria or viruses completely depend on a third organism termed as the carrier or vector. The vector does the job of transmitting them to the host. An example of this interaction is the transmission of malaria caused by a protozoan of the genus Plasmodium to the humans by the bite of an Anopheles mosquito. Third type, that is mesoparasite. Those parasites living in an intermediate position, being half ectoparasites and half endoparasites, are called as mesoparasite. For example, certain birds who feed on the food left out in the teeth of the crocodiles. Facultative parasite. An organism which is able to live either a free living or parasitic existence are called as facultative parasite. For example, Strongyloids stercoralis of man, some free living amoeba such as Naegleria, fungi such as Candida. Epiparasite or hyperparasite. An epiparasite is one that feeds on another parasite. They are also called as hyperparasite. For example, a protozoan living in the digestive tract of a flea living on a dog, and Histomonas melagridis, it is a protozoan which is hyperparasitic on the nematode worm Heterachus gallinae. Obligatory parasite. They are the organisms which has become completely dependent upon its host for its existence. For example, Trichomonas, Taenia solium and Trichinella. Incidental parasite. This type of parasites occurs in host where it does not normally occur. For example, Fasciola normally does not occur in man, but is incidental if found in man's liver. Periodic parasite or temporary parasite. This feeds on host but does not live on host. For example, blood sucking flies like female Anopheles mosquitoes, Fasciola hepatica, that is liver fluke, Cystosoma, Ascaris and Haemoncus. Heterogenetic parasites. Heterogenetic parasites are those who exhibit the alteration of generations. For example, coccidial parasites and Strongyloides. Social parasites. This type of social parasites take an advantage of interactions between members of social organisms such as ants or termites. For example, parasitic ants parasitize other ants using aggression and deception. Kleptoparasites. In kleptoparasitism, parasites approach the food gathered by the host. An example is the brood parasitism practiced by many species of cuckoo and cowbird, which do not build nest of their own, but rather deposit their eggs in nest of other species and abandon them there. ActoParasite. An ActoParasite is a parasite in which the host species is closely related to the parasite, often being a member of the same family or genus. An example of this is the citrus black fly parasitoid and Carcipelaflexa, unmated females of which may lay haploid eggs in the fully developed larvae of their own species. These result in the production of male offspring. The marine worm Bonelli verdis has a similar reproductive strategy, although the larvae are planktonic. Parasitoids. Parasitoids are organisms whose larval development occurs inside or on the surface of another organism, resulting in the death of the host. This means that the interaction between the parasitoid and the host is fundamentally different from that of a true parasite and shares some of the characteristics of predation. Types of host. Hosts are the organisms on whom the parasites survive or obtain their nutrition. Let us have a look at different types of host and their importance. First, that is definitive host. A definitive host is generally considered the main host. It includes animal or plant that nourishes and supports a parasite. It does not benefit the parasite and is often harmed by the association. For example, the malarial parasite mates and reproduces in the mosquito. However, its gametocytes are formed in humans, making humans the definitive host and not the female mosquitoes. Second, intermediate or secondary host. It is a temporary host, but is essential for the completion of a particular parasite's life cycle. A vector is usually the intermediate host, playing an active role in the transmission of the parasite. For example, parasitic helminth larvae may have 1, 2 or more intermediate hosts in their life cycles. Third, that is accidental host. This type of host may be those that can function as the normal host, but is infected only occasionally for some reason. For example, zoonosis are human diseases that can be acquired from vertebrate animals. Humans are accidental hosts in that human infection is not required for propagation of the infectious agent in nature. Humans have become ill from zoonosis for as long as we have hunted or domesticated animals, and most newly emerging infectious diseases are zoonotic in origin. The causative agents of zoonotic disease can be virus, bacteria, parasites, etc. Fourth, that is permissive host. This type of host is either a definitive, intermediate or accidental host that allows the parasite to complete its life cycle in part or the whole. Reservoir hosts are permissive hosts, alternatives to definitive host, such that the infective stage can be passed from the host to the population of the definitive host. For example, influenza virus attacking human. Fifth, non-permissive host. It is a host organism that is not true definitive host and receives the parasite, but the parasite finds itself in a dead end as the parasite not being able to complete its life cycle and eventually dying within the host. For example, with various marine ascarids of the family Anisakidae such as Anisakisp, which gives rise to the condition of anisakiasis on ingestion of raw infected fish. Transported host. It refers to a host organism other than true intermediate host that receives the parasite in the position of intermediate host so that the parasite is helped to go to the definitive host. For example, Echinococcus granulosus normally passes to a dog through an intermediate host such as a goat or sheep. But the parasite, instead of passing through the intermediate host, may come to infect a human being and remain, causing hydatitis, and a dog has no chance to get it from a person. Host defense mechanism. Hosts respond to parasites in many different morphological and behavioral ways. A healthy animal can defend itself against pathogens at different stages in the infectious disease process. The host defenses may be of such a degree that infection can be prevented entirely. Or if infection occurs, the defenses may stop the process before disease is apparent. At other times, the defenses that are necessary to defeat a pathogen may not be effective until infectious disease is well into progress. The host defense mechanisms can be divided into two groups. First, constitutive defense. This type of defense is common to all the healthy individuals. This defense provides general protection against invasion by normal flora or colonization, infection and infectious disease caused by pathogens. The constitutive defenses have also been referred to as natural or innate resistance since they are inherited to the host. Inducible defense. Defense mechanisms that must be induced or turned on by host exposure to a pathogen, for example, during any infection. Unlike the constitutive defenses, they are not immediately ready to come into play until after the host is appropriately exposed to the parasite. The inducible defenses involve the immunological responses to a pathogen causing an infection. The inducible defenses are generally quite specifically directed against an invading pathogen. The constitutive defenses are not so specific and are directed toward general strategic defense. The constitutive defenses by themselves may not be sufficient to protect the host against pathogens. Such pathogens that evade or overcome the relative non-specific constitutive defenses are usually susceptible to more specific inducible defenses once they have developed. Adaptation in parasites. Parasites invade and infect most effectively to those hosts that exist within their same geographical region. This phenomenon supports the Red Queen hypothesis, which states that interactions between species like as the host and parasites lead to constant natural selection for adaptation and counter-adaptation. The parasites track the locally common host phenotypes, therefore, the parasites are less infective to allopatric, that is from different geographical region host. To prove the adaptation, the analysis of two different snail populations from two different lakes, Lente and Poria in New Zealand was carried out. These snails were exposed to two pure parasites, that is digenic trematode, taken from the same lakes. In the experiment, the snails were infected by their sympatric parasites, allopatric parasites and mixed sources of parasites. The result suggests that the parasites were more highly effective in infecting their sympatric snails than their allopatric snails. Though the allopatric snails were still infected by the parasites, the infectivity was much less when compared to the sympatric snails. Hence, it can be said that the parasites were adapted to infecting local population of snails than others. This is a very good example of adaptations in parasites based on the geographical area. Parasite transmission or colonization. As the parasites inhabit living organisms, they face a lot many problems. Hosts of the parasites actively try to avoid, repel and destroy the parasites. Hence, the parasite employs numerous strategies for getting from one host to another, a process termed as parasite transmission or colonization. Some endoparasites are ingested by their host while some penetrate their host. Once inside the host, adult endoparasites release the offspring into the external environment to infect other hosts. Many of the adult endoparasite resides in the host gastrointestinal tract, where offsprings can be released outside along with the host excreta. Adult stages of tapeworms, thorny-headed worms and most flukes use this method. Some protozoan endoparasites like the malarial parasites and trypanosomas, infective stages in the host blood are transported to new host by biting insects or vectors. One pathway of the parasitic worms entering the human body is through pets and other animals. For example, dogs are carriers of Echinococcus, a type of tapeworm. The tapeworm eggs tend to spread over a dog's fur through its anus. Toxoplasma gondii parasite is found in cat fecus and one can be infected by toxoplasmosis through this parasite. Some parasites like protozoa are transmitted through contaminated drinking water. This contamination is by fecal matter of an infected person. This mode of transmission is seen more frequently in underdeveloped countries due to poor sanitation and hygiene. However, rural areas of the United States are also not spared by protozoa infestation. Some parasites do not need to be consumed in order to be transmitted. For instance, the Trematoda fluke can only be transmitted when the skin comes in contact with the contaminated water. However, the most common way to getting parasitic infestation is through food consumption. Vegetables grown with contaminated water or bad fertilizers may give parasitic infection to the host. Another method of transmission is through the soil. Direct exposure to fecal contaminated soil can lead to parasitic infection like hookworms or strongyloides, which penetrate the skin and infect the intestine. Evolution of parasitism. Parasites are found everywhere around us. Almost all species on the planet are parasitized at some stage or the other of their lives. It is difficult to understand that how have parasites evolved. Let us see some more concepts regarding their evolution. Parasites are extraordinarily diverse even if belong to the same group. Closely related parasites also sometimes behave very differently, infecting different host species, causing different pathologies or infecting different tissues. For example, E. coli bacteria, a typically harmless inhabitant of the human gut, can in different forms cause diarrhea, intestinal bleeding, urinary tract infections, kidney bleeding, meningitis and other diseases. This diversity can be one of the reasons of their evolution. It is widely appreciated that parasites are prone to rapid evolution, and because of their often short generation times and large population sizes, parasites may evolve far more rapidly than their host. Attempts to understand parasite evolution and the relevance of that evolution to disease go back at least half a century to the first observations of drug resistance evolution in bacteria. However, the application of evolutionary theory to parasites remain fertile ground for original research. Indeed, evolutionary biology and parasitology have undergone such rapid advances in recent years that it has been difficult to keep abreast of both. Some recent papers, including the study of Babayan et al., apply results from one branch of evolutionary theory, life history theory, to the characteristic of pathogens of medical interest such as parasitic roundworms that are nematodes and malaria. Babayan et al. Propose that the life history of parasitic microfilarial worms show evidence of adaptive plasticity. Specifically, they propose that worm development inside a mammalian host changes in response to the host immunity, and that the parasite's response matches predictions from life history theory. For a parasite, the host is the means to produce its descendants, and several strategies are imaginable. A prudent strategy in which the host survives for a long period but produces few parasites per unit time, a maximally virulent strategy in which the host is entirely transformed into parasites and killed quickly. The level of optimal virulence depends on the mode of parasite transmission. Vertical transmission favors prudent strategies, whereas competition between parasite strains and horizontal transmission favor virulent strategy. Host-parasite relationships. Parasitism is a type of interaction which involves the association of host and parasite and is achieved at the expense of their host life. Host serves as a suitable microenvironment that provides place for habitat, growth factors, nutrient supply and reproduction to the parasites. The host is called infected once a parasite starts multiplying on it. Ultimately, parasites are metabolically dependent on the host for its survival. Parasites are smaller than their host. For instance, bacteria, fungi, algae, protozoan, nematodes, virus, plants and animals are parasitic organisms which go and infect their host who can serve them the best. The spatial relationship of the parasite to the host, that is the localization of the pathogen to certain organs or tissues, has been used as criteria for differentiating generic, specific and intraspecific taxa. Factors inducing infection. Once the parasite invades the host, the infection starts. When the parasites keep on replicating and their growth is uncontrolled, then infection rate increase on the host depending on two factors. First, that is location, the place where the parasites are actually located. Soft tissues and sensitive organs infected may give higher infections and severity. Second, that is number of organisms. The large pool of organism may give infection more rapidly than a small number. Even the rate of replication of the parasite may affect adversely to the host. Organisms that induce infectious disease are referred as pathogens, and the potential capacity of certain species of microbes to cause a disease is called as pathogenicity. There are two types of pathogen, namely primary pathogen and opportunistic pathogen. When a pathogen causes disease by direct interaction with the host, that is healthy, it is referred as primary pathogen. When an organism is partially infected by pathogens that are likely to cause infection is referred as opportunistic pathogen. Host-parasite relationship outcome. Host-parasite relation always ends into profit to the parasite and severe infection to the host, ultimately causing a death or disease. There are many examples of the parasite attack where they invade, infect and finally even kill their host. Most of the parasitic organisms cause diseases and the degree of causing the infection is termed as pathogenicity excreted by the particular parasite. Virulence of pathogen is characterized by infective nature, invasive property and potential of pathogen. In this chapter, we have focused upon the parasitism, their types, different types of host, how do the host defend themselves, parasitic attack, different types of adaptation amongst the parasite, transmission of the parasites, how did they evolve, about the host-parasite relationship, factors inducing infection and the outcome of host-parasite relationship.